The congregation stopped whispering the moment they saw Pastor Bill Thompson's sunken cheeks and labored breathing in the hospital bed. For 43 years, he had thundered from the pulpit about Catholic idolatry and Mary worship, his voice echoing through Cedar Grove Baptist Church every Sunday morning. Now his own deacons shifted uncomfortably as Nurse Patricia mentioned. He kept asking about the woman in blue who visited his room at night. Deacon Roberts cleared his throat. The medication was clearly affecting their pastor's mind. No visitors were allowed after 9 o'clock, and certainly no Catholic nuns had any business in the Baptist wing of Memorial Hospital. Pastor Bill's daughter, Linda, squeezed his weathered hand, trying to ignore how his eyes kept drifting toward the corner of the room where nothing stood but shadows. The man who had spent decades warning his flock against Marian devotion was now describing detailed conversations with the Virgin Mary herself. His voice carried the same conviction that once filled their sanctuary, but the words coming from his lips would have scandalized every Baptist grandmother in 3 counties. At 3:15 that Tuesday morning, Pastor Bill's heart monitor began racing as brilliant light filled his hospital room. The woman who appeared wore robes of deepest blue, her presence radiating peace that penetrated 43 years of theological certainty. She spoke without moving her lips, her voice flowing like gentle water over stones worn smooth by decades of prayer. "I am Mary," she said, "and I have watched you serve my son faithfully, though you have misunderstood my place in his love. Your heart has been sincere, William, but your understanding has been narrow. Let me show you the bridge between all who truly seek him." Pastor Bill tried to speak, but found himself listening as she revealed truths that shattered his denominational walls. When morning came, he pressed the call button with trembling hands. Linda arrived to find her father weeping, transformed by an encounter that defied every sermon he had ever preached. The woman in blue had been no medication-induced hallucination. She had been as real as the conversion that now burned in his chest, as undeniable as the love that suddenly embraced Catholics and Baptists alike. Pastor Bill's request for a Catholic Bible sent shockwaves through the Baptist leadership team gathered around his bedside Thursday afternoon. Deacon Roberts exchanged horrified glances with Board Chairman Stevens as their pastor of 4 decades asked Linda to contact the hospital's Catholic chaplain immediately. "The fever must be affecting his judgment," Stevens whispered, but Pastor Bill's eyes blazed with clarity that silenced their protests. He described Mary's visit in precise detail, sharing theological insights that transcended anything he had learned at seminary. She had shown him how her role pointed toward Jesus, not away from him, how her intercession unified rather than divided believers. Linda watched her father's transformation with growing amazement and terror. This was not delirium speaking, but profound spiritual awakening that threatened everything their church community believed. When Father Rodriguez arrived despite the Baptist leadership's objections, Pastor Bill gripped the Catholic chaplain's hand with surprising strength. "She told me to tell you," he said, his voice carrying authority that made even his harshest critics lean forward to listen, "that her children are found in every pew that honors her son." Friday evening brought the crisis Linda had been dreading. Pastor Bill's breathing became shallow and irregular as his blood pressure dropped dangerously low. Dr. Martinez gathered the family with gentle words about preparing for the end, while the congregation split into factions outside his hospital room. Linda held her father's cooling hand, torn between grief and confusion over his radical transformation. Half the church elders whispered that his Catholic turn proved the devil was claiming his soul, while others wondered if they had witnessed something genuinely divine. She had grown up hearing her father condemn Mary worship from the pulpit, yet now he spoke of the Virgin with reverence that seemed to bring him closer to Jesus, not farther away. As machines beeped their urgent warnings, Linda faced losing the only parent she had ever known while grappling with faith questions that threatened her own spiritual foundation. Was her father's vision real, or was she about to lose him to delusion and division? The weight of 43 years of Baptist doctrine pressed against 3 days of impossible encounters that defied everything she thought she knew about God. Father Rodriguez arrived Saturday morning despite Deacon Roberts blocking the doorway and declaring that no Catholic priest would corrupt their dying pastor's final hours. Pastor Bill's voice carried surprising strength as he ordered his deacon aside, insisting that Mary herself had requested this meeting. The Catholic chaplain approached the hospital bed with careful reverence, unprepared for the theological depth that flowed from the Baptist minister's lips. Pastor Bill described Marian doctrines with accuracy that stunned Father Rodriguez, explaining how the Virgin had shown him the unity between Baptist salvation by grace and Catholic understanding of Mary's intercession. "She never pointed me away from Jesus," Pastor Bill whispered, his eyes bright with conviction that silenced even his harshest critics. "She showed me how her yes to God's plan opened a door for my yes to salvation. We have been fighting over the same love, arguing about the same grace." Father Rodriguez found himself weeping as this Protestant minister articulated mysteries of faith with insights that bridged decades of denominational divide. The Holy Spirit was clearly moving through impossible circumstances. Linda paced the hospital corridor Sunday afternoon, torn between protecting her father's Baptist legacy and honoring his profound transformation. The nursing staff had begun sharing strange reports that made her question everything she thought she understood about reality and faith. Nurse Patricia described the overwhelming scent of roses that filled Pastor Bill's room during his evening prayers, though no flowers had been brought to his bedside. The night shift reported unexplained drops in room temperature during his apparent conversations with invisible visitors, followed by peaceful expressions that defied his critical medical condition. Maintenance worker Carlos crossed himself as he told Linda about the soft blue light that emanated from her father's room at 3:15 each morning, visible through the frosted glass, but invisible to security cameras. Even Dr. Martinez admitted that Pastor Bill's vital signs showed impossible improvements during these unexplained episodes. Linda realized she was witnessing something beyond medical explanation, something that challenged her lifelong Baptist skepticism about Catholic mysticism. Her father's experience was producing evidence that transcended denominational boundaries and demanded spiritual consideration. Monday morning brought Pastor Bill's most difficult request yet. Despite his weakened condition, he insisted on gathering his entire congregation in the hospital chapel for what he believed might be his final message. Linda watched Cedar Grove Baptist members file into the small interfaith space, their faces reflecting decades of trust, now mixed with profound concern. Pastor Bill spoke from his wheelchair with the same authority that had commanded their pulpit for 43 years, but his words carried humility that stunned his longtime listeners. He asked forgiveness for years of preaching division instead of unity, for condemning Catholic brothers and sisters who loved the same Jesus he served. "The Virgin Mary came to me," he said, his voice steady despite the oxygen tube beneath his nose, "not to lead me away from Christ, but to show me how narrow my understanding of his love had become. She taught me that grace flows through many vessels, that salvation belongs to all who truly seek him." The silence that followed was deafening. Deacon Roberts wept openly, while Board Chairman Stevens struggled with 40 years of anti-Catholic doctrine crumbling before their transformed pastor's testimony. The congregation exploded into heated whispers the moment Pastor Bill's wheelchair disappeared down the hospital corridor. Half the members felt betrayed by their spiritual leader's apparent abandonment of Baptist principles, while others struggled with the undeniable sincerity in his transformed voice and manner. Mrs. Henderson declared she would never return to Cedar Grove Baptist if they accepted Catholic heresy, while young Mother Sarah Williams whispered that she had never seen their pastor look so peaceful or speak with such genuine love. The church board called an emergency meeting to discuss their pastor's fitness for ministry and the future of their congregation. Linda spent Tuesday evening researching Marian apparitions on her laptop, discovering details that matched her father's descriptions with shocking accuracy. He had mentioned theological concepts about Mary's intercession that appeared in official Catholic doctrine he had spent decades opposing, knowledge he could never have acquired through his Protestant education. The evidence mounting around her father's experience defied rational explanation while demonstrating fruit that seemed genuinely spiritual rather than delusional or demonic. Wednesday evening brought the conversation Linda had waited 42 years to have with her father. Pastor Bill took her hands with trembling fingers and asked forgiveness for the rigid theology that had driven wedges between them throughout her childhood and adult years. "I was so concerned with being doctrinally correct," he whispered, his voice heavy with regret, "that I forgot to show you the love that doctrine was supposed to protect. Mary showed me how my pride in biblical knowledge had blinded me to the grace I was called to share." Linda found herself crying as her father acknowledged the harsh judgments that had damaged their relationship, the conditional love that had made her feel she could never measure up to his theological standards. For the first time in decades, she felt genuinely seen and accepted by the man who had raised her. "The Virgin Mary taught me that pointing people toward Jesus means loving them as he does," Pastor Bill continued, his eyes bright with tears. "Unconditionally, completely, without requiring them to meet my expectations first. I failed you in that, daughter, and I am deeply sorry." Thursday morning brought medical news that defied Dr. Martinez's expectations. Pastor Bill's vital signs had stabilized overnight. His breathing improved dramatically, and his energy levels showed remarkable recovery that contradicted his terminal diagnosis just days earlier. Against all medical predictions, Pastor Bill began making phone calls to religious leaders throughout the county. He contacted Methodist Pastor James Wilson, Presbyterian Minister Carol Anderson, and even reached out to Rabbi Samuel Cohen at Temple Beth Shalom, inviting them to join him in conversations about Christian unity and interfaith understanding. His gentle humility and transformed heart began melting resistance from even his harshest denominational critics. Pastor Richards from First Assembly had arrived, prepared to confront theological heresy, but left deeply moved by Bill's obvious love for Jesus and genuine desire for reconciliation among believers. Word spread quickly through the religious community about the Baptist pastor's miraculous recovery and radical transformation. Leaders who had viewed him as a divisive fundamentalist now found themselves drawn to his message of grace that transcended denominational boundaries while honoring the Christ they all claimed to serve. Sunday evening's joint prayer service filled Memorial Hospital's largest conference room with denominational leaders who had never shared worship space before. Pastor Bill sat quietly as Methodist, Presbyterian, Catholic, and Baptist voices joined together in hymns that transcended their theological differences. When he stood to share his testimony, the room fell silent with respectful attention. He spoke with gentle authority about his encounter with Mary, emphasizing how she had pointed him toward deeper love for Jesus rather than away from biblical truth. His words carried such genuine humility and Christ-centered focus that even his staunchest opponents found their resistance melting. Deacon Roberts, who had initially blocked Father Rodriguez from entering the hospital room, approached the Catholic chaplain with tears streaming down his weathered face. Board Chairman Stevens shook hands with Rabbi Cohen, acknowledging their shared commitment to serving the God of Abraham despite different traditions. Linda watched in amazement as 43 years of denominational walls crumbled before her father's transformed witness. The Virgin Mary's message of unity was bearing fruit in ways that defied every theological argument she had ever heard. 6 months after his miraculous recovery, Pastor Bill Thompson stood before the newly formed Cedar Grove Interfaith Council, a ministry that had grown from his hospital bed encounter with the Virgin Mary. His health had returned with strength that amazed Dr. Martinez, allowing him to dedicate his remaining years to healing denominational divisions throughout the region. The Baptist pastor who had once preached against Catholic idolatry now worked alongside Father Rodriguez, Rabbi Cohen, and ministers from 7 different denominations to serve their community's spiritual needs without requiring theological uniformity. Their joint food pantry, grief counseling services, and youth mentorship programs demonstrated Christian unity in practical action. Linda served as the ministry's coordinator. Her own faith deepened by witnessing her father's authentic transformation. She had learned that divine grace often arrives through unexpected messengers, challenging assumptions while drawing hearts closer to truth rather than further from it. Pastor Bill's encounter with Mary had become a catalyst for breaking down barriers that had divided believers for generations, proving that heaven's love transcends earthly arguments about doctrine. His story continued, inspiring other religious leaders struggling with pride and division. Have you ever experienced God's love in an unexpected way that challenged your assumptions about faith? Tell us about a time when divine grace broke through your religious barriers and opened your heart to broader understanding.